Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
I actually think of a way to practice mindfulness more frequently is giving yourself space to pause. Even if it's in a conversation and it feels urgent, oftentimes when we have this sense of urgency, sometimes it's a real sense of urgency, but a lot of times we're fed urgency because we're more reactive when we have a sense of urgency. It tends to send us into survival mode. And when we're in survival mode, our brain is much more likely to bucket things and react. We're often placed into that mode because, frankly, we're more manipulatable when we're in that space. So pausing is an opportunity to really kind of zoom out a little bit and ask questions and notice things in a way that maybe we wouldn't have noticed if we had just automatically bucketed stuff. But that takes practice too, which is why mindfulness is a practice.
You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zawrotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping clients make space for what matters most in their lives. Join me each episode and we'll talk about decluttering, stress management, habits, personalized productivity, gratitude, and so much more. I understand the overwhelm of life because I'm a wife, mom to kids and cats, and a former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome back to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and today we're talking mindset in a different way. Mindset work is a powerful and necessary approach to change, but like every tool we use in our life and business, we need to be sure we're using the right one the right way. Too often we take ideas offered at face value, especially with an abundance of influencers out there sharing their version of wisdom and success. Today, my guest and I are helping you question some common approaches that are used with the best intentions most likely, but are actually quite harmful. I welcome back a guest from the very first season of the Positively Living podcast. Nearly 2 years to the day, Valerie Friedlander joins me again to address her original topic of toxic positivity, and we add a couple more to the mix. Valerie is a multi-passionate creative, life business alignment coach and host of the podcast Unlimited. She has over 20 years of leadership and personal development study, including coaching certifications, mediation training, and business management. Spiritually and scientifically based, Valerie's work holistically supports her clients to develop a present and joyful life in harmony with their powerful work in the world. When she's not working with clients, you'll find her hanging with her husband and 2 sons, working on an art project, or nerding out with a sci-fi movie. Valerie is a former client and a dear friend, and a fellow coach whom I respect deeply. 2 years brings many changes, especially when you add in a pandemic, so I'm excited for you to join us as we expand on our original topic. What hasn't changed over time is how Valerie and I both believe in questioning for ourselves and our clients. Today, you'll walk away with an understanding of what mindset is and is not, where it doesn't apply to struggles, and the 3 perhaps well-intentioned but decidedly harmful mindset approaches people often use. You'll learn how to spot them, why they're harmful, and what to do instead. And in keeping with the theme of efficiency, you'll learn the one thing you need to handle all 3, and it's the best first step for you to take. After you've listened, be sure to message me at @positively_Lisa on Instagram and post and tag me so we can spread the word. Welcome back to the Positively Living podcast, Valerie Friedlander. I am so excited to dig into today's topic. I can't believe that it's been exactly 2 years to the date almost since you were first here with me in season 1. And You're always a favorite of mine, and this topic needs talking about.
Yeah. And thank you.
So before we dig into it, let's set the scene about you. Would you tell us a bit about who you are and who you help and what makes you light up?
Well, so many things. Okay, so I am a multi-passionate creative. I am a certified professional coach, energy leadership master practitioner. I am trained as a mediator. I've done a lot of work around communication over the years, and I love working with other high achieving, multi-passionate, particularly women who are wanting to create life by their own rules. And so often we hear these ideas about like, well, what do you want to just do the thing and, just think differently? And I'm getting in my own way and like all of those sorts of things. And oftentimes the biggest issue has to do with the internalized rules. It's not just about the things that you've made up in your own head and your own like personal limiting beliefs. It has to do with societal limiting beliefs. And I have a background in sociology. I love sociology. I love patterns. I studied pop culture and patterns in pop culture and how they relate to people. So I take all of these passions that I have and pour them into working with women to help them hear themselves beyond not just the stuff that they've created because of life in their own experience, but also because of all the things that they've taken in from the world around them. And I just love it when the people I work with have these aha moments. I feel like I grow when they grow. It's like this symbiotic relationship. And that really lights me up when they have these amazing achievements. And I think the more of us that are doing that, the better the world can be. So that's what lights me up.
Okay, so there's no shock, right? That Valerie is my people. What you're talking about in terms of those aha moments, the things that you and I, we have so much in common, but the foundational part of it is being the questioners and helping clients whom we share, actually. Clients who work with both of us, which I absolutely love because, coaches need coaches, right? We've talked about this so many times. And just the idea that we don't have to live in default mode. And that's such a huge part of what you do, which I love. And with that, it's catching things that I think thread themselves right through our lives and also heavily through the communities in which we spend a large amount of time, right? Online business communities, communities of women business owners especially, but this is everywhere. These ideas of mindset work, and mindset work is a wonderful thing.
So important.
Right? So critical and a huge part of what you do and some part of what I do. There's that wonderful overlap and like that transition into you need to have that foundationally before you can be truly productive. And all of that is important, but we need to make the distinction of where it's kind of gone off course with certain influencers and people who are sharing it. And I think it's like a really horrible version of the telephone game where we're sharing the wrong information, right?
Yeah.
Let's start by defining the idea of mindset and mindset work. What is it and what isn't it, Valerie?
Mindset work is the way we think about the world. It's essentially like the filter that we perceive the world through. It's how we bucket things. Our brains like patterns, and so it wants to put things into buckets because it simplifies life for us. Having rules for how we show up allow our brains to do the autopilot, the frontal cortex, the part of our brain that processes new information, that makes decisions, expends more energy. It actually expends the most amount of energy of any part of our organ system. So it is helpful for us for functioning to be able to stick things back into the more automatic spaces. We're able to do that by taking in patterns and going, oh, well, this means this, this means this, this means this, and putting those things so that we respond and engage in accordance with that pattern. We don't think as much about it. The big issue with that is that it means that we don't necessarily think as much about, not even think as much about it, but like the whole movement around mindfulness. And mindfulness is about being present and really being aware. And it's almost like being able to step back from something. It's that pause. I actually think of a way to practice mindfulness more frequently is giving yourself space to pause. Even if it's in a conversation and it feels urgent, oftentimes when we have this sense of urgency, sometimes it's a real sense of urgency, but a lot of times we're fed urgency because we're more reactive when we have a sense of urgency, or oftentimes people will talk about it as like lack mindset or that sort of thing. It tends to send us into survival mode. And when we're in survival mode, our brain is much more likely to bucket things and react because we don't have the energy, we don't have the space. We need that energy to fight or flee or freeze. And we don't want that energy for figuring out what we're supposed to do, even if part of what's in survival mode is trying to figure out what we're supposed to do. We're often placed into that mode because, frankly, we're more manipulatable when we're in that space. So pausing is an opportunity to really kind of zoom out a little bit and ask questions and notice things in a way that maybe we wouldn't have noticed if we had just automatically bucketed stuff. But that takes practice too, which is why mindfulness is a practice. The problem is that not everything is mindset. And I touched on that when I mentioned there are reasons why we're in survival mode, and it's not all of our own making. There are a lot of systems in our society. There are a lot of structures in our society that are designed to keep us in survival mode because, hey, guess what? We buy more things. We're more manipulatable to doing what we are expected to do to uphold the structures in our society. And that reinforces power structures in our society, which it's important to understand that it's not just, well, you just did this to yourself. And that's where the idea of mindset and mindfulness often gets, I don't necessarily want to say derailed, but distracted, is because a lot of the people that are talking about these things are people that exist in a higher stratification of the power structures in our society. And so when those people are teaching these things, they don't necessarily see their own blind spots and the privilege that they exist in when they're trying to teach other people stuff. So they can perpetuate the power structures by doing that.
I need a moment.
Take a pause.
There's so much going on here, and but it's so good. All right, so backing up this idea of the mindset being those filters, those buckets, the automation, and I love that because we talk about, especially in the productivity side of things, which is my lens, right? The automating being a good thing when it comes to habits, but at the same time, we also need to make sure, is this where a habit needs to apply? Are we automating in the right way? So again, it comes to the questioning part of it. I love that you mentioned mindfulness. We just had an episode with Lindsay Coward, who talked about simple mindfulness practices, and we use the word practice for that reason. So thank you for that. Using the concept of the pause, you're talking about stepping back, taking a breath, questioning and being curious, which almost every episode of this podcast, we've mentioned this, because being curious means that you let go of the judgment. You let go of the preconceived notions, right? You stay in the moment of saying, okay, what's going on here? Kristen Kubik mentioned this with regard to our emotional regulation on the podcast. And you need that moment because, like you said, it's reactive. And so if stepping back from being reactive, you need that space. That's good to know, all of these things, but let's step now into this. Not everything is mindset work. And what you're talking about here, survival mode. I just wrote down the word victim placement, and I don't want us to say victim blaming or victim mentality, but there's something in there about victims and victimization, just in terms of if you say to someone, okay, you're not thinking positively enough, or you're not thinking your way through this. I know both of us are like hackles are raised here because it is, yeah, when you say that to someone, it's cruel.
Yeah. I've had to do a lot of learning around this myself. Like I've come at this with always from since I can remember. We talked about this in the toxic positivity episode. Like there's always been this resistance to the idea that I shouldn't, like that you should only have the happy emotions, right? Like
Right.
that you want to feel happy so that you can do happy things and you'll attract more happiness into your life or whatever. And that if you're not attracting happiness, then you must be not thinking well enough and things like that. But it gets tied to things like wealth, and it gets tied to things like bullying, or I mean, frankly, you cannot mindset your way out of racism. Like I've always had this resistance to not feeling my emotions, but I didn't understand the structures that I was existing in to the level that I have been learning and unlearning recently. So working to apply that into my own practice, both as a responsible human being, but also as a coach, acknowledging that mindset and these ideas of what does it actually mean to think positively, and what does it mean to be a victim, and the ideas that like, oh, it's not good to have victim mentality. Well, if you've been victimized, um
Then you're experiencing that. It's an experience, not having a mentality.
exactly, yes, experience. So one of the things that I will often look at is I've even like the idea that things happen for a reason. I have a long time of practicing in 12-step work, and there are certain things that are said in there, like, you know, things happen for a reason. And I've not, that always bothered me because I don't actually think that things happen for a reason, because it implies that things are intentionally being done to you. Like bad things happen for a reason so that we can learn from them and grow. And I think you can learn and grow from things that are hurtful and harmful. But does that mean that they happened for a reason? Where is your power here? Because there are places where maybe your power isn't here in the now. Maybe your power is in the future and you're building up into that power. I think of empowerment as choice. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like the idea that people empower other people. I mean,
Yes.
you can remove barriers for other people.
But they empower themselves. Yeah.
They're the ones who step into the choices. Where do I have choice? And that is the biggest thing that the pause gives you is access to choice. And sometimes we're in positions where we don't have choice in that moment. And to protect ourselves, we react. Even if maybe it wasn't necessary. Maybe in retrospect, you look back and go, oh, I was reactive to that. I shouldn't have yelled there, whatever. That's not necessarily helpful to go beat yourself up about the past. This is one of the things that a lot of times people come to me is like, they have enough self-awareness to beat themselves up over doing things. And it's like giving yourself that grace to go, okay, this happened and it happened for a reason. I responded this way for a reason. What was the reason? And if you can understand what happened in me, what is the, emotional intelligence? I actually like to call it emotional awareness. No, nothing's wrong with you that you responded the way you did, that you reacted the way you did, that you had that. It's going, is there a pattern here that I want to engage? Is there something I want to do differently? And you said something really important just a little bit ago about the idea of habits and developing habits. And I like to call it like, it's about conscious habits. If you build in structures that you can autopilot intentionally, if you consciously build in those structures to support you, that's amazing. That is so helpful. It's one of the things I love about the work that you do, Lisa, is helping people unpack what are these unconscious habits that your brain is doing just to help you out, but it's actually not helping you out. And how do we shift that into helpful habits that are conscious, that you chose so that you can autopilot into them knowing that this is helpful. Also knowing that you and I both work on is being able to recognize when something isn't serving you anymore. Maybe it was serving you at one point. And that's one of the key pieces is whatever you're doing, whatever's happened, however you showed up to that, it was designed to help you in some way, shape, or form. So being able to honor yourself and acknowledge that, hey, you are doing the best that you can. You are showing up the best way that you can. Acknowledge that and then go, okay, so what is the pattern though? And then what would serve me better now? Instead of beating yourself up over what was happening. That's the difference between that victim thinking and the victim mindset and actually being a victim. You can be a victim of something without it being how you define yourself. Like your obstacles, your challenges don't define who you are. They're challenges. They're things that are happening in your life and things that happen to you, not who you are. I can't say it enough.
Oh, yeah. I work with so many clients who have an identity connection. And in this particular case, it has to do with productivity in terms of doing, that you identify in what you're doing, how much you're doing, are you doing enough? All of those things wrapped up in there versus the being, right? And it could be a tricky road. So given that, let's dig into the three things. And originally we talked toxic positivity, but you had posted something on Instagram and I was like, okay, that's a sign. We need to come back and talk about this. Okay. And there were three things. Toxic positivity was one of them. And I feel like digging into that a bit, just explaining the three, give a nice overview. These are the things we need to be watching out for, right? Not only in terms of, are we doing them? And you and I have firmly stated we're not immune. We're learning better and doing better, right?
Absolutely.
So watching for these things, because they can sometimes be the hidden red flags. You're like, it's red, except it was kind of camouflaged. So what are we watching for? Are we doing it? And then also, I guess, what do we do with it? But yeah, let's dig into those three, Valerie.
Yeah. So it is difficult because there are pieces of helpful things in each of these. We get all mucked up. You mentioned before we started recording, it's like this game of telephone where we hear something that sounds good, but we're in such a rush in this society, busy doing, consuming and producing, that we take these pieces and then they become toxic, as it were. So it's like the idea isn't necessarily problematic. It's the way it's being infused into the way we do things, basically to uphold the norms of the way we do things. So the first one that I mentioned is toxic positivity that we did a whole talk about. And I'll just give the definitions of those. Toxic positivity is using excessive and ineffective overgeneralizations of a happy, optimistic state across all situations. Again, everything happens it's dismissive is really what it is. So toxic positivity often gets used in a way to kind of avoidance of emotions, kind of trying to push it to the side. So I like to say, rather than doing what is toxically positive, which is that avoidant behavior of uncomfortable emotions, acknowledging those emotions, and when appropriate, shifting focus from what isn't desired to what is desired. So I look at that as that's helpful positivity or productive positivity.
I like that. Yeah. And with that, it's exactly it. You're talking about taking the pause, processing, allowing, doing the ranting, doing the grieving, processing the trauma, letting the messy be messy.
Yes.
Taking a breath. And then when you're ready to say, now what? You can use the can-do mindset. That's my thing.
Exactly. So I work with a lot of people who would describe themselves as empathic, and they care deeply about people. They pick up on people's emotions. And so what happens with that is that oftentimes when people are feeling uncomfortable or upset, they want to fix it because it's impacting them. And I don't mean to say that that's a totally selfish reaction to have. I mean, but at the same time, when you're trying to fix it and you haven't been asked to fix it, when you don't know what is actually helpful to that person, then trying to fix it is about you. It's not about the other person. It's about your discomfort. And I think we have not ever been taught to hold space for that discomfort, both in someone else and in ourselves, and what that brings up for us. Things come up inside of us because of some reason. There may be a resonance there. There may be a trigger there for something that you felt. And then, it can spiral into making assumptions about things. And that's often the case is, oh, I recognize this feeling. I feel this feeling. I know how I feel about this feeling. And this is what would be helpful for me. And so then you just kind of do it. So I think that's one of the reasons why that toxic positivity has become so prevalent, is because we have not learned to sit in discomfort. And that discomfort isn't bad.
Yeah, so true. There is a meme floating around that I actually like. Sometimes there are ones that they call something into question and you're like, ooh, yeah, okay. And it's the idea of when you see someone upset saying, did you want me to listen or did you want me to help you fix it?
Yeah.
And making that distinction. I thought that was so lovely because, again, it's making it about them as opposed to you, and understanding that sometimes you do need to sit in that discomfort.
So number 2 is spiritual bypassing, and it's very closely tied to toxic positivity.
Mm-hmm.
It is using spirituality and its practices to invalidate or explain away people's lived experiences and psychological wounds. So very similar. Again, also the response to that is listening and holding space, acknowledging experience, and validating emotions. And that can be very difficult. And one of the things that I do like to highlight within this is that sometimes you're not the person to help somebody else. And that can be hard too when you really care, to be able to have that boundary around saying that this is not something that I can help with. I can't show up for you the way you need. And that's hard, but sometimes it needs to be said, because not all wounds are things that, it could trigger something in you that is something that you need to hold space for. And that means that you can't hold space for that other person. And that's okay. The important part then is that you're doing that work, that you're acknowledging it instead of shoving it aside and being like, well, I don't want that to be true. Because again, talked about the things getting tied up with our identity. And so when we have to say something like that, when we have to step back or even not fix it and sit with the not being able to fix it, or maybe it's not even something that needs to be fixed. Maybe it's something in you that you need to look at, whatever it is. To be able to say that and acknowledge that may rub up against this sense of self that is even more uncomfortable. That's hard. And there's grief involved with the reimagining and re-understanding of who you are and letting go of things that who you thought you were. It's one of the things that a lot of white people, for example, are running up against as they deal with white supremacy. Is recognizing to be able to step outside of the needing to be a good person and just do the work that needs to get done, and know that it's not who they are, it's how they've learned to be, it's the systems that we exist in. There are so many layers to that, but when we get tied up with what our identity is, it creates this fragility that we back off from, we dig our heels in. Like, being able to sit in the discomfort is really important. And there are some amazing people who talk a lot about showing up to that. There's an article that I particularly like that talks about the spiritual bypassing, and then also talks about, related to that, some of the stuff around imposter syndrome, and how imposter syndrome, it's not actually about the person experience, like we've syndromized something that is actually being done to people in spaces, and how problematic that is.
Yeah, there's so much going on here. I'm immediately thinking of, when people are grieving, that this happens a lot. And also what you talked about, and this can come from a good place, really, truly, it frequently does. And I think that the real key is to notice that it goes back to that pause, that discomfort, that idea that we can hold space. And I think it's coming back to how valuable holding space is. And I do want to make a distinction here that you inspired in me as you were describing this, which is who helps whom and in what situations. And I think this applies on a personal and professional level. Maybe the distinction of, when can I help my spouse and when is it time for me? That's like essentially not my jurisdiction. There are times when I have talked to someone who came to me with this concern about being productive. And it was like, actually, I'm saying this in the gentlest way possible, of course, but it was like, I think you would benefit from unpacking this in therapy, talking to a therapist. And I don't think it's a productivity issue. I think you would benefit from therapy support first. Then we can see where you stand. It's so quick, I think, for us to put it on ourselves to say, oh, is something wrong with me, right? That breaks my heart. But at least in terms of what we're talking about today, making sure that the right person helps you in the right way.
Yeah. It triggers the like, I'm not good enough.
Right.
But it's one of the reasons why I keep asking, especially recently, like, what is enough?
Yeah.
How do I define enough? Like anytime enough shows up, it's not enough. It's like, well, what is enough? Do I have a clear understanding of enoughness in this context? Because if I don't, it means that I'm autopiloting. I'm in default around what enough feels like. And if I'm uncomfortable, nothing is ever enough. And I also appreciate that understanding that we deserve teams of support, and we can't always be all the things to all the people, including to our spouse. I've had my husband has definitely said a few times, like, stop coaching me. I'm like, just normal people ask questions too, but I have to ask, like, how can I be a best support to you as you engage this? Because sometimes it's just, I just needed to say it out loud. Sometimes you need a little space to process and be aware. Again, sometimes we can't hold space the way someone needs space held, but we can care. Self-awareness, I would say, is probably the biggest thing here.
Hello. We bring it up all the time for a reason. Absolutely.
And that's what I do, is help people be more self-aware.
So. Exactly. So the Prentice Hemphill quote keeps coming up. It's been on the podcast. I've mentioned it with my clients lately, and it's I guess paraphrase it because I can't remember the exact words, but it's like the boundaries are the distance at which, or the gap, right, at which I can love myself and love you simultaneously. And so given that, maybe there's a distinction here between holding space and giving space and adjusting accordingly, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to number 3 there.
Number 3. Okay. So number 3, I recently came across, and it was just like, I would say it was like a smack in the face, but it was also like, it was like a good one. It was like, yeah, I needed that.
Hello, spicy.
That's exactly what I was feeling, and I didn't have a term for it.
Right.
Especially in this space of entrepreneurship and a lot of the things that I've run into as starting my own business and the online coaching thing. And it's just so rampant. So I was excited when I came across it. I found it in the book Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. And it's not his definition, but he references it in the book, cruel optimism. And it is taking exceptional cases, usually achieved in exceptional circumstances, and acting as if they can be commonplace. There is a natural tendency to do that. I came across in, oh goodness, I think the book is called Loaded, and it's about money. But one of the things that the author talks about is how when you have things, like when you have wealth, for example, you tend to focus on what you did to earn it and not see what you didn't do to earn it. And it's a psychological thing. They've actually done studies around it. One of them was about, and she references this in that book, around like a game of, I think it was Monopoly, where one person was given an obvious advantage that they even called out at the beginning of the game. They were given more money. They were given some properties already, something like that. And they were like, hey, this isn't fair. And they're like, that's okay, just keep playing. Well, that person won the game, but they claimed that the reason they won by the time the game had been played out, They had won because of their strategy.
Mm.
And what they had initially didn't come into play. So that is why I think the why behind cruel optimism and what happens with it being so rampant is you get people, not all the time. There are certainly people out there who are probably more malicious about it, or maybe not thinking about it in those terms, but more
Maybe
conscious of it,
manipulative,
more
maybe.
manipulative about
Yeah.
it. Yeah. But I think there are a lot of people out there who have used some of these tactics because they really care about people and they want to help people. But because of the psychology behind what happens once you've achieved a certain point in what you do, that, you know, when you're teaching other people how to do what you do, you don't necessarily see the privileges that you came into doing that with.
Mm.
And there are a lot of privileges in this society that get intentionally over time hidden from us. Mia Birdsong's book, where she talks about the family unit being having societal privilege. I had never even thought of that before as a status piece of like, oh, well, you do get breaks and you do get these optics in society. You know, how many times do you get pressured to have those things? It's about that accumulation. We don't see what we accumulated without thinking about it. We see the things that we intentionally went after. So it comes into play as really problematic when you have people will just do this thing that I did, because they don't necessarily see the places that it might not apply to other people, especially when it has to do with money.
You know, this is why I've been so irked when people talk about time management, right? And and this whole, okay, 1440, that's the number of minutes in a day. What are you
Oh
doing with
gosh,
it? You know,
yes.
and I have been ranting about this forever. You can go back in my Instagram account and you can date it, especially when you start getting these memes and things that are like flying around social media saying we all have the same amount of time in the day. What are you doing with yours? And I'm like, sorry, stop right there. We may have the same amount of time, but we do not have the same amount of resources. It drives me crazy.
Yeah. I know that I've talked a little bit about that idea of like time is energy and different tasks, because I know you talk about
Mhm.
different tasks take different amounts of energy for different people.
Yes.
And so being like, okay, this, you know, it's where we get really mismatched expectations around what we can actually accomplish, is because some things are harder or have more emotional baggage or like whatever. And then you get into, well, there's just mindset your way. Oh, just, you know, bypass that emotional baggage and just do the work. And it's like, no.
Yeah. There's that word again, that just word,
Yeah.
right? And so that's what we need to stop. And then, yeah, getting into the idea of privilege, getting into the idea of oversimplifying.
Mhm.
This feels like its own episode.
Yeah, I think it really is. I mean, like I said, it was a new term for me, but it was like, this is what I keep running into, that I keep like, something is wrong here. This is a problem. And I mean, what I said in terms of like a little blurb as to instead of cruel optimism would be acknowledging real barriers. That's important. But, you know, again, sometimes you don't see those. So, depending on the level of privileges that you have in this society, there is more work to see the barriers that you are inclined not to see or that are hidden from you. So that's where all the unlearning work comes in, is unlearning the blindness to the privileges that you have. And Johann Hari actually talks about this as well, of like, and working with others to find ways to dismantle those barriers. Because going back to that toxic individualism, this idea that everything is personal responsibility,
Mhm.
it's not. Yes, you can have personal power, but that's different. You know, again, going back to what choices do I have access to, or what could I do to make those choices available? And it's not all doing it by yourself. Most of the things that you run into in this episode, the things that create the dynamics that we're talking about, are not individual issues. So often it's like a defect inside of you that you feel bad. No, there are reasons. I mean, when you are constantly being fed upsetting information, of course you feel awful, right? Like, of course that's happening. And algorithmically, our attention is held by upsetting things, by things that anger us. That's going to hold our attention more. So when we have surveillance capitalism that makes money off of our attention, then naturally those things are going to get fed to us more. Also, pollution. That is not an individual issue. Like the pipes being not okay, right? Like all of those dynamics, like those are not individual issues. Health even isn't an individual issue. Oftentimes we place the onus on individuals as, well, you're just not eating healthy enough. Do you have access to healthy food? And not only do you have access to healthy food, do you have the financial ability to buy it? Do you have the time to cook it? Like there are so many layers that aren't just about an individual. It's about a societal dynamic. So when you put the onus on the individual, then we get into this like beating ourselves up over things, that victim mentality. And we don't actually create the changes that are needed to help people live lives that are fulfilling and joyful and all of, and wealth and all of those things that people are often looking for.
Well, there you have it. So along those lines with those three, and they're big ones to be sure. So there's a lot of places to dig in, but overarching, I wrote down the words acknowledge, validate, be curious, make space, hold or give space. So to watch for this, and then those first steps are maybe, again, to focus on the pause, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, because the pause allows you the space for self-awareness. Without that, it's hard, if not impossible, to engage almost any of these things, and giving yourself grace, because it's all learning. We're surrounded by these things. So naturally, there's a reason why you might struggle with them.
Exactly. So kudos to you for listening and absorbing and understanding.
Yes.
Those are steps. Those are steps in the right direction. When we know better, we do better. That's a beautiful place for us to wrap up, Valerie. So tell us where we can find you online.
Okay. Well, you can find me on Instagram and on Facebook at Unlimited Coach Val. You can check out my podcast, which is called Unlimited with Valerie Friedlander, on most podcast listening platforms. And if you just want to click to find me, then you can find me at valeriefriedlander.com. And then all of my stuff is there. I have a page with free resources, no sign up necessary. Just go click download anything that sounds appealing to you. And if you want to be on my email list, then you can absolutely join. There will be a button for that too.
Awesome. I will have those links in the show notes, and I will specifically have the episode that coordinates with what we're talking about today about the mindset work. So that'll be an easy way to go right to Valerie's podcast. I highly recommend listening to that. Okay. Now, are you ready for the rapid wrap up?
Yes.
Okay. So just fill in the blanks.
Okay.
A song that lifts my spirits, makes me dance.
So I was thinking about this one a lot, because there are a lot of songs. I love music, as you know, but the one that always makes me dance, even if it's like just in the car and I'm moving my body, is Family Affair by Mary J. Blige.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. And how about a quote or mantra that I love to share that inspires me?
I'm going to go with be the change that you want to see in the world. And yeah, I mean, I think it reflects very much being self-aware and how you show up. And are you showing up to the comfortable and uncomfortable the way that you would hope the world would?
So true. How about a resource? It could be a book, an app. You have mentioned some already.
A lot of things.
So if there's anything else, and it doesn't have to necessarily relate to what we're talking about today, just something in terms of a resource that's made my life better is?
Two things. One is the Libby app. And you might have it different. It's a way to listen to audiobooks through the library. And really any app where I've done a lot more reading since I opened myself up to listening to audiobooks, because I just wasn't making the time to sit and read. Like some of the books that I referenced, actually, all the books that I referenced, I listened to on audiobook. So either the bookstore.org has an app as well if you're not wanting to pay Amazon for Audible. It also has a good membership listening app as well. So I love those. And then the other thing is connect with people.
Yeah. And by the way, it's also a huge part of something called positivity resonance. It's an important part of positive psychology, and it's where the true positivity comes from, not the toxic side, that connection. So it's really good advice. And then last, but certainly not least, and it all ties into this, what are you grateful for today, Valerie?
You.
Aww.
I know that might sound cheesy, but I am. I really am. I love our conversations, and it's good to have awesome friends like you.
I totally agree. And I'm going to cheese you right back by saying I am most certainly grateful for you. And I'm especially grateful that you came back to share yet more of your wisdom. So thank you, Valerie, for shining your light so brightly in this world and for continuing to share it with us.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who listened. I'm grateful for you too.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.